So good morning, Year 9. Today you're going to be producing a piece of creative writing using the vocabulary bank that you created in Monday's lesson. So today I'm going to really help with some of those things that are really common, getting started, thinking about how do I turn all this vocabulary into something that works together. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera down so that you can have a look at this, because often we're faced, aren't we, with a piece of blank paper and we just don't know where to go and where to start. So I'm going to help you with a little bit of that today. I'm also going to talk you through a few slides on here, which I will then put on Show My Homework so that you can see and look at them, okay? So on Monday's lesson, we asked you to make a vocabulary bank inspired by this picture. So we've got somebody up on a big mountain range. I believe that this is the Himalayas, and so Everest is in there somewhere. We've got this big, vast, sprawling mountain range, and we've got somebody who clearly is very cold, very high up, up looking back at this sort of great mountain range behind them. And we asked you to think about different sorts of vocabulary linked to colours and tones, sounds and emotions, the different thoughts and feelings that they might be having, different textures and materials, the rock versus the soft snow, the mist versus perhaps the ground beneath them, the wind whipping through the air and so on. And also thinking about size and scale and how that looks to see a scene like this and what the kinds of words that we might use. Now, to help you with that, the English team did a little bit of a brainstorm of different words that you might want to use here. And I'm going to put this up on Show My Homework. And these are some words that you may not have thought of, or that might just add to your bank. Especially words to do with things like maths. For example, perpendicular is up here, really steep, sharp cliff faces. Words like awe, when you're completely in wonder and amazement at what you're seeing. And words to really help you describe different elements of the mountain, like summit and elevation, ridges and crags, gullies and valleys. So different words to describe the shapes of the mountains and the space around them. Okay, so you'll have your own words. There's some more words here to help you that are up on Show My Homework. But in essence, what we're asking you to do is take this picture here and to turn it into a paragraph of creative writing. Now today what we want you to do is to produce a rough draft of a paragraph. So 50 to 100 words, a good sort of third to a half of a page of paragraph about this. But often students will say to me, well, that's all very well, but where do I start? Now there are a few things that you might want to do here. I often think that it's a good idea to think ahead. In a big piece of creative writing, you're probably going to have 4 or 5 paragraphs in total. So you might want to think, how could I split this image into 4 or 5 different sections? Now, one really obvious section would of course be to focus on the climber herself here, thinking about her thoughts and feelings. Is she excited? Is she exhausted? Is she exhilarated? Is she determined? Is she proud of herself to be here? Is she afraid? At what point? And what is she thinking of here? Is she thinking about people back home? Is she thinking about how she's finally achieved something? What's happening here? So you might choose to start your piece of creative writing really focus on the thoughts, feelings and emotions of this one person. So my idea number 1, I'm writing this on my blank piece of paper, is a focus on the thoughts and feelings of the climber. She raised lots of money for charity. Who's she been inspired by? What's going on? Okay, so that's one idea, and you might choose to write a paragraph about that. Another idea, another way of doing this, would be perhaps to look really far off into the distance, into the horizon. Now, I think this is often quite an effective thing for us to do. It encourages us to use prepositions like beyond and above, and to think about how vast the landscape is. And if we look at the back here, it could almost be the horizon between the sea and the sky. It's that same sort of colour, isn't it? So we could maybe think about metaphors that we could use here, link it to the sea. Often clouds are associated with gods and the heavens and things that are quite spiritual, so you might want to think about that. You might want to think about how the clouds look. They're soft, they're gentle, they appear light and infinite here, don't they? Going on forever. So you might focus on that horizon. That could be something that you look at. And you might think about the thoughts and feelings that you have when you're thinking about this panoramic view. Because it is like a panorama, isn't it? We're seeing this whole great big sphere. It's almost like being on the edge of the earth. Another idea that I might have here is maybe to look at this point here. Our eye is really drawn, isn't it, to this central point, the pinnacle, the high spot, the summit of this mountain here. And you may want to focus in on that, really look at the shadow that it's casting on the rest of the land above it, the sheer drop. Here you might start to look at angles and the crags and the textures. You might want to look at the paths that's leading up to it, perhaps where she's got to go next, is this next point. So we might focus on this as being perhaps her goal, or perhaps where she's aiming to go, or somewhere that is too inhospitable and too unfriendly and too hostile to go to. So if it were me, this is another really good starting point. I might look at the summit, I might look at the shadow, I might look at this idea of the pinnacle and where it stands within the landscape. Now the final idea, I think, where I would go here is I would perhaps focus my attention downwards. We've looked beyond in the distance, we've looked slightly up here, we've looked internally at what this character might be thinking and feeling. But what we can do is move almost beyond the picture. So we might think about what might be below. Is there a steep drop, a crevice? Where does this go? Have people fallen here and died? Is this a notorious danger spot? Has there been an avalanche here before? So I might think a little bit about the risks and the dangers, and I would perhaps just take that moment to think about what's going on below with the risks and the danger. So here we've got a bit of a framework, haven't we, for 4 different paragraphs. Now, it doesn't really matter where you start here, it's your choice. And you may have different ideas to me, and that's completely fine. But here I've got 4 ideas: the thoughts and feelings of the climber, the far horizon in the distance, the summit, the top of the peak, the highest mountain there, and then also this idea of below and this idea of danger and menace and risk. And you might want to think about how best to put that together. So you might decide, I'm going to start with the furthest point, with the horizon. You might want to start with the objective, the summit. You might want to start from the risks and the dangers, then perhaps to the thoughts and feelings of the climber. It's up to you. But what's important is that you try and think of 4 different places that you can go and then choose one of them to really zoom in on. So for this, I think I'm going to choose to zoom in on the summit because I think I'm going to start with her objective. And what we might do here is think, okay, so how am I going to write a paragraph about this aim and this objective? I think if it were me, I would start with some really good concrete nouns, really set the scene, really describe in detail this kind of really beautiful and intricate and rough and ragged, sharp almost, kind of razor sharp point. If we look at this next slide, these are the instructions you've got and show my homework, but there's also lots of different openers here. Now you want to think about how you can vary your sentences so they're of different lengths. You want to create some drama, so you might want to vary your punctuation, perhaps using dashes to slow the action down, perhaps using some really short sentences to create that sense of tension and drama. But there are lots of different ways you can open sentences. You will have done this at middle school, and we've talked a lot about this year in school. But things like using a preposition like above, beneath, beyond, below, signposting to the reader where your position is and what you're focusing on. Using adverbs like cautiously, like soon, because remember adverbs aren't always ly words, they're words that show us how far and to what extent. You might start with a concrete noun. You might start with the summit. You might start with rock, the cliff face. You might start with footsteps or the glacier. You might want to use adjectives. They're a good way to kind of create that atmosphere and the sounds and textures in your writing. So crisp, fresh, pure, colours, of course, temperature. Or you might use a dynamic verb. And I think if I was going to start with the summit, I'd be quite tempted to start with this idea of it looming, rising, falling, maybe. It's kind of almost making it alive, but using some personification, this idea of it rising out of the earth and being this almost like temple, this goal to reach. So we've got a really inspiring image. Please have a good think about that and choose one area to focus on first of all. And what we want you to do today, put that up so you can see me. What we want you to do today is to write one really good paragraph here about one aspect. And we want you to do that in rough draft. You don't need to submit it today. What we'd like you to do is have that written, and then on Monday's lesson, what we're going to do is help you to assess it and improve it and then add to it. So in your lessons next week, you're going to have a really beautiful extended piece of carefully crafted descriptive writing. So good luck with that. Take your time. If you cross things out and start again, that's absolutely fine. We encourage that. But make sure that you're putting all of those great words and tools to use. So nice to see you. Have a really good day and have a great weekend. And we'll see you again on Monday.